Hey, Fox Valley. It's good to be with you this afternoon, and it's another great and wonderful day because the Lord is on his throne. We know in Psalm 118 it says, "This is a day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it." I think I love that. I try to practice that, but candidly, and I think we'd all share this, is sometimes it's really, really difficult. Sometimes we feel the stress of life, the strain, the tension of the things going on around us, and it robs us and it makes it really difficult to say, "This is a day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." And so this morning or this afternoon, what I want to do is just take a moment and reflect on that because I think we're all experiencing a little more stress than usual. We already live in a stressful filled culture, but we feel the stress a little bit more. We're isolated. We feel this in our homes, some of the growing tensions, just sometimes families being around each other more than usual. And we rub each other wrong sometimes. We say things, and part of it is because of the increased stress. And the stress shows itself in feelings of agitation. Sometimes we get a little frustrated a little quicker than we normally would. Sometimes there's a little more anger because of the stress. And so I want to take that straight on as we continue to live in this time of COVID-19 and the stress of daily living. And it just reminded me of a season in Paul's life. The Apostle Paul was writing to a church, and he talked about a thorn in the flesh. And I'm going to read the verses in just a moment, but I grabbed these this branch of some thorns, and you can see, I mean, some of these are fairly large, and you can imagine if that thorn went all the way in, how painful it would be. And there's some smaller thorns, and of course, if they just pierce the skin a little bit, you feel the tension and you feel the strain. And for some of us, these thorns might be just piercing or poking us a little bit. It's an irritation. It's on the minor side of things. But some of us, the thorn in the flesh has gone much deeper. Some of us in Fox Valley Church, and certainly some in our online community, you've lost your job, you've been on furlough, you don't exactly know how long it's going to be, and all these things are just like a stronger, deeper thorn in the flesh. And so what I want to do is, if you have a Bible, encourage you to go there, or you can just simply listen. But the Apostle Paul wrote to this church in Corinth, like I mentioned, and I just want to read a couple verses 9 and 10. Well, let me back up a little bit. In verse 7, Paul says, "There was given me a thorn in the flesh." And the thorn, we don't really know what it was. It was something, though, some people would say it was internal to Paul, or something physical, something that was part of him. Others say it was something outside of him. Something like what we would say, circumstances or people. But whatever it was, it's important to see that this was given to him by God. That it was not out of God's control. It wasn't like this caught God by surprise. It wasn't something that maybe snuck up on God. It said there was given to the Apostle Paul this thorn. And I think perhaps God didn't tell us what the thorn was so that it would be more expansive to help us understand what he was saying. And of course, it was probably piercing Paul pretty good, because in the next verse 8, he says, "I entreated the Lord several times, remove this." But here's where I'd like to drill down a little bit into the scriptures. In verse 9, it says this, "And he," that is the Lord, "said to me very specifically, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So I want to take these couple things and begin to think about how they impact us in this stress-filled time. Whether it's a little poke in the skin and it's a more minor irritation, or whether maybe one of the thorns has really pierced deeper. A lot of people are seeing that home tensions are up. You can read more and more, seeing the news about some of the conflicts going on in homes, some abuse taking place, excessive drinking, people trying to deal with the stress. But as Christ followers, that's not what God calls us to do. He calls us to turn to him. And so I want to just remind us of this. He says, my grace is sufficient. That is the kindnesses of God. God cares. He cares about this thorn. He gave it to us because he's doing something unique in our lives. We don't want to miss this opportunity. We want to take it seriously because we recognize that God is Lord. He is in control. He is, if we use the word, sovereign over all that is taking place, not only in the United States, but globally. And so we need to see that in the midst of this, in the midst of the thorn, or let me just say, in the midst of the stress, he's saying, my kindness is sufficient. My kindness is there for you. My mercy will carry you through this. Of course, we have some choices to make. Will we receive this kindness? Will we turn to the Lord? Will we turn to other things? Alcohol, raging, all kinds of other physical things that are unhealthy. And he says, no, turn to me. My grace is sufficient. Why? Because power is perfected in weakness. When we recognize the stress and the strain and the tensions of life, we see the weakness of the human flesh, of our own flesh, and we can turn to Christ and his power. And so Paul comes to this place. He says, I would rather boast about this power available to me. I'd rather boast about the weaknesses because that's when the power gets displayed, because he's leaning into him. But then when he gets into verse 10, he brings us into a place where we can certainly say COVID-19 is fitting right into it. He says, with distresses, we feel the distresses. He talks about with difficulties. So we all are part of this today. And then he says, very interestingly, for Christ's sake. For Christ's sake. So why does he say that? He says, for Jesus' sake, these things are going on. And it's because when we turn to him, Jesus is magnified. He's glorified as we lean into him because we begin to see his power, his strength. So Paul says, for Christ's sake, when I am weak, that's when I am really strong. And so if you're feeling stress, if you're feeling some of this strain and the tensions that are going on because of all that's happening in our world, let me just wrap up with a couple ideas or points or things that you could take away that I think are very practical and will help us all through this time. There are 3 T's. And they're simple to remember, and I think you could walk away dealing with our thorn in the flesh in this way. The first one is this: talk to God. Just talk to God. It says in Philippians 4, 6, and 7, it says, don't be anxious. In other words, don't let the stress come on. He says, don't be anxious, but in everything with prayer and supplication. Well, prayer and supplication, that's talking to God. Let our requests be made known to God. If you need a job, if you need food, if you need money, if you need help, let these things be told to God. But when we think about conversation or talking to God, we also need to listen. And so that's part of this first T is let God talk to you. He's speaking to you right now through this passage in 2 Corinthians chapter 12. My grace is sufficient for you. He wants us to know that and remind us of that we don't have to rely on our own abilities and our own skills and our own power and our own provisions, but he wants to do it. The second T, And I think this is really helpful when it comes to stress and strain and tensions. Talk to other people. God never meant for us to carry this alone. In fact, the church, as Pastor Chris mentioned yesterday, he mentioned how important the church is with the one another passages. And it's so important that we think about these kinds of things, that we're to carry one another's burdens. So I would encourage you to talk to people. If you're feeling weak, nothing wrong with that. For when I'm weak, that's when I see the strength of Christ or his power. So talk to other people, but let them talk to you too. How are they managing it? What are they doing to find it? Are they finding help in songs? Are they finding help in reading the Psalms? Are they meditating on Scripture? Are they crying out to the Lord and they just need to talk about it? We're human beings and it's so important. So first of all, talk to God. Secondly, talk to other people. Don't carry it alone. It's no good. You have a tremendous, awesome pastoral staff at Fox Valley Church. I want to encourage you. Reach out to them. Call them, text them, set up a time to visit with them over the phone or Zoom or FaceTime, whatever it is, but they want to be available and they would serve you well. Well, here's the final T I want to close with. Take action. One of the best things we can do too, while we're dealing with stress, is to sometimes serve other people. I got to say what happened to me the other day. I was in my backyard and I was picking up some branches and raking leaves and all this, and my neighbor was out there in his yard, except he wasn't able to do some of that stuff. He just physically couldn't do it. And so I looked over at his yard and he had already last fall cut down some branches and they were just laying on the ground under the trees. And I just thought it'd be good if I served him. See, it got my eyes off myself and I tried to serve him. We need to take action in these times. Think of someone you could call. Think of someone you could reach out to. Think of someone you could drop a gift by or show them in some way you love them. So these are the important things. Talk to God, talk to other people, and take action. By faith, take some steps of love. Let me pray for you right now and pray for me as well. Father, thank you so much for Fox Valley Church. I thank you for the people that are empowered by the very person of your Spirit who empowers us. He's our comforter. He's our encourager. He's the one who leads us. So God, we ask for your power to work through us, that we would demonstrate the very power of Jesus Christ. Bless your people today. Remind them that your kindnesses are sufficient for today. And then Jesus himself said, don't worry about tomorrow. Today's got enough problems. So God, help us to lean into your mercy, your kindness, yes, your grace for today. God bless Fox Valley, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful day in our entire online community. You too. May God bless you, and may it be a Christ-filled, grace-filled day.